this film, in X-Men 2, the
when you shoot the first film, you have no concept of what it's going to look like because you're surrounded by, well, this won't be here at the time, but this is a green screen. Whatever you're seeing on the screen, it's actually green right now. But that's the way we shoot things. You know, it's like you're surrounded by blue screens and green screens, so you have no idea when it comes to the special effects what my blast is going to look like. I mean, my blast may be different this time around. I don't know if it's going to be right now, you know. So it's exciting. You know, when I saw the first film, it was as if, you know, I didn't work on the movie. It was like everything's put together and the effects are in, and this type of movie, when principal photography is over, you've made about half of the movie.
I don't often share my inner thoughts about the work that I've done on a film, but I do have to say that there was quite a bit of it in the first one that I was not particularly happy with. It was good workmanship work, and it looked pretty good in the film, and obviously it didn't hurt the box office, so I think it was successful, and we nearly got nominated for an Academy Award. So I think we did a pretty good job. But having lived with those shots, you really know what you want to do better. And I torture myself for years after I finish a film about all the things I could have done better. And X-Men's no exception. In the last film, we had about 520 shots or so. On this film, we're probably in the 700 to 800 category, and the first movie's effects were simpler and smaller. Our effects here are larger, much more ambitious technically, much more ambitious aesthetically. There are a number of big challenges on X-Men, and I would suppose that if I was going to break it into sequences, that the X-Jet flight and the dogfight that ensues is quite a challenge.
Mike Fink started us with an animatic that he created of what he wanted to see from a choreography point of view. And we duplicated that, knowing that we had to build a system to go create tornadoes and sky and background. Everything in the shot is on the computer. There are no real elements, effectively. And we knew this from the beginning. So we used the computer to go and choreograph exactly what Mike had in his animatic to start there and figure out where the ground plane would be. And at the same time we were choreographing and making sure Mike was happy with the choreography, we were building a system for the tornadoes.
On X-Men, I was the lead setup TD for the tornado sequence. So I worked on all the R&D for how we were going to accomplish creating over 100 tornadoes for the dogfight sequence in X-Men 2.
I think we have probably more twisters in the first 2 or 3 cuts of this chase sequence than they had in the entire movie, twisters.
It's all fiction, and so when you have something like that, you have to make sure you have knobs so that the director or Mike Fink or even myself can play. And that's what we did as we built these things.
So what we're looking at now is a finished composited render from one of the shots in the tornado sequence, the dogfight sequence. This is the second shot that has tornadoes in it, and it was a particularly difficult shot. It has 9 tornadoes, and they're growing out of cloud decks. So what we have is 9 tornadoes that have all been created with volumetrics and particle systems. We also have a cloud deck which we had to merge into seamlessly. So this is the final composite of our image, but where we start is way back in animation. As the effects team, what we get is we get a file with a camera move along with tornadoes that have been created by our animation department. So we take this information and we go ahead and build a particle system around this and then take that and put it through a volumetric render or jig to get the final results. What we did is we created a system that would really allow us to quickly build a tornado that would match the wireframe that came from animation. What we have is we have our tornado skin. From this, we extract a spline, or a line that runs right down the center. It's kind of like the backbone of the tornado. And on each one of those points of the backbone, there's a certain attribute that tells us how wide the tornado is at that point. So on each point, we know what the radius is of the tornado. And this is one of the ways we maintain the shape. And then what we do is we use an orbit method, and we have these particles spin around their point on the backbone at a set radius and a set speed. We have a number of controls available to us also. So we have control, of course, over the speed of how fast they orbit. We can modify the radius of the orbit at any time. And you'll notice that if I were to make the radius much larger, the particles are actually going to orbit much slower now. So we have some calculations that will adjust the speed based on the radius of the tornado. Once we've created our particle system and brought it back into copy geometry over, what we're going to do is we're going to take this geometry and put it through the process of rendering. This is where we apply surface properties and apply lighting to get the finished image. So here, this doesn't look very much like a tornado, but after the rendering process, what we end up with is these nice volumetric, soft tornadoes that really feel like they have a lot of mass to them. So what we do in this process is we have currently these spheres, or these balls, copied to each particle. When we render this, each one of these turns into a volume, and the easiest way to think of that is think of them as a little ball of fog, or a little pocket of fog. And layered on top, with such depth, it really becomes almost a surface of material, and this is how we represent our tornadoes in the final render. So the rendering process is really the key. This is where we drive our look. This is where we control kind of the quality of these tornadoes. So the motion is the base, and that's really what kind of controls the feeling of how these tornadoes are integrated and moving in the scene. But the rendering process is what really allows us to tie these in and make them feel like they're in that scene with the jet, with the sky, and with the ground. So really our goal with the tornado setup was to create something that would allow the artists to really spend time with the quality, with the look of the tornadoes, paying attention to how thick the mist is, and also how dark we get in the shadow area, and how this tornado plays with the light of a sunset.
Nightcrawler, of course, has the ability to transport or teleport himself at will, so that he can move from one spot to another whenever he wants, and he just leaves a little puff of smoke behind.
There's this word that it goes bamf, like B-A-M-F, and that's the sort of noise he makes, and then he just, like, you know, he just disappears, and then he bamfs somewhere else. So I think how we do it in the film is, like, you know, basically you just cut, and I've done some stuff where I'm like teleporting onto a wall, and all these people are pointing guns at me, and actually I'm up there for ages, and in the film I'll be there for like a second because I bamf off somewhere else before they shoot me.
We're going to create Nightcrawler's bamfs fairly traditionally. In other words, we shoot the scene with him there, and we shoot the scene with him not being there. And then we take the two, and we combine them with a little bit of digital manipulation, and then he reappears or disappears. All of that's been created digitally. We're not doing anything practically on the set. And the whole effect is a little bit like a thunderclap, because if he disappears from a scene, he would evacuate the space that he's in. The air would rush in to take up that space, and as it rushes in, the smoke he leaves behind would be disturbed and dispersed into the room.
Initially, the art department generated a series of pictures. I think there were basically 5 to 6 frames in total, which was a hand-drawn animation. So this is the original BAMF artwork that was basically the starting point for what we tried to achieve in computer graphics. Really, it's about a 5 or 6 frame series of drawings followed by a very crude particle animation. So on the first frame, this is the image of Nightcrawler with no processing. On the second frame, we start to see the smoke moving outward from him, his body kind of tearing away from itself. Then on the next frame, that progresses slightly. Then on the next frame, big change, we start to see the smoky guy in the center. You kind of still see his eyes right there, and starting to kind of collapse inward. And then even further, I mean, immediately he disappears, and by the 5th or 6th frame, he's this bunch of smoke that lingers. And that's the original BAMF.
Most of our technology was actually based on fluid dynamics for a water simulator. We found that, through our research, that it gave a very nice quality and a very fluid quality to the smoke that was immediately recognizable as smoke, but also
the plastic prism is back. It is based on the same plastic prism we had before. It was built exactly the same as the last one. That is, Magneto's cell was built the same. But we've enlarged it now, and there's a security screening area. The ramp that we had in the last film with the big plastic shroud around it, the tunnel, didn't open and close, but this one we've made to actually on camera open and close, so we don't have to do all of that in CG. We just do the wider shots in CG and leave the tighter shots to camera, which is wonderful. When we had Ian in the cell, we shot Ian doing virtually all of the action in the cell on that set, although we removed the first third of the cell because we were going to replicate it in CG.
From this point out, we're reconstructing that on the computer so that it can be broken.
Yeah, everything you see breaking and falling down is all CG and matched to the live action set.
These sets of doors, this ring, all this glass that's breaking are done on the computer. It's very hard to do this on a set and to have somebody walk through it. It's also even hard just to have someone on a green screen and put them back into something like this. It's also hard to choreograph breaking things that easily. So Mike decided that he wanted to have control over it, and we proceeded to do it. When you break glass, it's actually a hard thing to do for us on the computer. It's a very natural event, and each of the pieces, you don't want to go and have an animator animate the multiple thousand pieces that are here individually. So what we do is we procedurally program again, and we say, gee, that's a piece of glass, I'm a piece of glass, I have boundaries, and as I fall I'm going to have a little bit of rotational components put to it, and I'm going to hit things, and when I hit, I'm going to hit and rebound in a certain way, and it will fly off, and by the way, I'm also going to fall by the force of gravity, which is 32 feet per sec, and it's going to look really natural because I'm going to do all that stuff sort of like a physics simulation. And indeed, our broken glass is sort of a physics simulation as the glass falls down. We did define how the glass is going to break and define the patterns by using an artist. Nori painted us a picture of the glass fracture pattern. We didn't want to write a program for the glass fracture pattern and waste the time to do that, so we just hand drew it. So it's a combination approach here.
For scenes like this, there's nothing that we can do with lasers or markers of any sort that's really going to help the actor. It's all in my eye and in Brian Singer's eye. So we watch Ian, for instance, perform, and I say to Brian, I think he's looking too low. I think the balls are higher than that. And then Brian says to Ian, can you raise your eye line just a little bit? And Ian looks up a little bit, and then Brian looks at me, and I say, yeah, that's good. And then we go ahead and shoot the shot. And it's only because in my mind, I know where those balls are. And we can give actors eye lines for where we think things are. And sometimes we use lasers to give them a dot to follow if it has to move, or a light bulb. Sometimes it's just a marker on a stick. Sometimes it's just a tape dot on the wall. Yeah, we do things like that. Cerebro was developed by many hours-long conversations between me, Brian Singer, Stephen Rosenbaum, supervisor here at Cinesite, and quite a few of the Cinesite crew. Lubo Christoph is an art director here, trying to come up with a conception of what Cerebro looks like when those walls fall away. How do the walls fall away? And then when they fall away, what do we see out there, and how do we see it? How does it turn on and off? And how far can we see? And what happens in between? Because we're seeing infinitely deep. How much depth can we build into the shots?
The problems with that environment is it's this big spherical space, and you see a map of the world essentially, and you see people on points of the spread across points on the map. What we wanted to do is make it dimensional, bring out some depth into the space between where Xavier is in the center of this spherical room, and reach out towards these people that are projecting off the surface of the map.
It's virtually all digital. All the atmosphere, all the effects you see in Cerebro, most of that stuff is all three-dimensional CG. The atmosphere and the rays and a number of the other things that are happening are all volumetric, so you get a real sense of distance as you look down. Light that moves affects the volume of the particles. There's a huge... I like to say that this show is really about particles. Particle animation is a very powerful tool in CG, and on this film, virtually every effect uses particle animation in some way.
My name is David Satchwell, and I'm a CG supervisor on the Cerebro sequence, which comprised of 80 shots and about 20 people helping out in the sequence. I'm going to take you through some of the shots here. So this is a previs shot, which was the very first part of the shot generation, which is just to get the camera move and what's happening within it. This is part of the Cerebro effect, where there's a lot of people represented within this space, and Xavier is trying to find mutants in it. And also I can show you one of the elements, which is a more final version of this effect, which is very volumetric. It's pretty cool. I can show you where Magneto comes into Cerebro, and this is interactively where the animators work. And what he does in this shot is come in and he moves tiles around with his power. This is kind of what it looks like when you play it back. Then when we go, this is a very rough shaded version of it just to get the timing of the animation. Then what we do is we do various different passes. This is a version of that to give it more shading. You can see here, to give it a more, start to get a more realistic feel in it. And then here is kind of it, the way it kind of looks all put together at the final stage. Yeah, so that's Cerebro.